So politics in America today are absolutely heated. It seems like no one can get along, and even within either of the major parties, there is so much infighting that regardless of who wins the election in November, and regardless of what Congress may look like in January, it seems like gridlock in Washington is a certainty. Now, while things may be far from civil, at least they're nonviolent. The same thing cannot be said about American politics in the 1850s, which famously saw one member of Congress approach a U.S. senator and nearly beat him to death. Today, we are going to be talking about the caning of Charles Sumner. As the 19th century progressed, America became more and more divided, and the prospect of a civil war became less and less of just a talking point. The South viewed Northerners as snobbish and out of touch with the common man, and the North viewed Southerners as backwards hillbillies. The biggest divide between them, however, was that of slavery. White Southerners believed that slavery to be the backbone of their economic system, and that if it were to be abolished, the Southern economy would collapse into a depression, leaving both poor and rich whites alike destitute. Now, this was not true, as wages for the white working class there actually went up after the abolition of slavery, since they could now compete for a whole host of new jobs that were previously, well, not jobs at all, but instead roles that black slaves were forced to fill. While most Northerners were still pretty racist in their own rights, the vast majority of them agreed that slavery was an antiquated relic of a bygone era, and that there was a reason why most of the rest of the world had already abolished it. Anyways, this is what America looked like when U.S. Senator Charles Sumner gave a fiery anti-slavery speech on May 19, 1856. During the speech, Sumner attacked the authors of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, U.S. Senators Stephen Douglas and Andrew Butler, the passage of which sparked bloody and brutal riots all over Kansas in response. Snippets of the speech were reported in the newspapers all over the country the next day, so when U.S. Representative Preston Brooks went to read his morning paper and saw that some Yankee was speaking ill of his cousin Andrew Butler, he was not happy. Initially, Brooks intended to challenge Sumner to a duel, but after some thought on the matter, Brooks realized that dueling was a gentleman's sport and that Sumner was no gentleman, so he hatched a plan. He would approach Sumner on the floor of the U.S. Senate and beat him mercilessly in front of his colleagues. Brooks and two other congressmen, Lawrence Keitt and Henry Edmondson, entered the Senate chamber on May 22nd towards the end of a hearing. They first ushered all of the women out of the room, as to shield them from what was to come next. Brooks approached Sumner, declared his speech from 3 days prior was libel against his dear relative, then took a wooden cane with a golden handle and began to beat Sumner. The first whack was to the face, blinding Sumner, who later recalled that the only thing he could see was his own blood. He then crawled under his desk in order to protect himself from his attacker, but the desk provided little shielding, and Brooks was able to continue striking him, with the blows now aimed at Sumner's legs. By around this time, the cane snapped in half, and Sumner, seeking an opening, leaped from under his desk and attempted to get away. Unable to move very far due to his now impaired vision, Brooks was now beating Sumner with the top half of his broken cane, in order to strike him with the metal handle at the top. Keitt and Edmondson by now had formed a physical barrier between Brooks and Sumner and the other senators, many of whom were attempting to intervene. Eventually, Sumner fainted and Brooks continued to beat his now unconscious victim until finally, two members of Congress were able to break through the barrier that Keitt and Edmondson had formed and restrained Brooks, who then stood up, dusted himself off, and briskly walked away, his cane now shattered into multiple pieces. Sumner came to several minutes later, where bystanders helped him to the Senate cloakroom, where he received immediate first aid care before he could be seen to by medical professionals. The carpeted Senate floor was now stained by Sumner's blood. The two halves of the country saw the event very differently. The North saw it as a brave, free speaker refusing to stay silent in the face of intimidation, whereas Southerners saw it as a Southern patriot silencing some loudmouth Yankee. Regardless of interpretation, it took the already high pre-Civil War tensions and made them ever tenser. The attack gave Sumner traumatic brain injury, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder, although these medical terms would not be coined until much later. Sumner took 3 full years off in order to recover from his injuries, before returning to the U.S. Senate, by which time Brooks had died from a respiratory infection.